I knew something was off the minute Julian showed up wearing a blazer, 3 sizes too small, and that god-awful cologne he thinks smells like power. He walked into the office like he was auditioning for Succession, barking orders no one asked for, patting backs like he owned shares in them. This was the final week before the acquisition closed, a make-or-break transition after 18 months of negotiations. Everyone else was scrambling. New org charts, email migration plans, Slack purges, digital asset audits. And then there was Robert, sitting in his glass-walled office like the eye of the damn storm, calmly uploading version documentation, while Julian was 2 doors down rehearsing his visionary talking points. I watched Robert from my desk, pretending to sort vendor contracts. I'd worked with him for 5 years, long enough to know his silences had more horsepower than Julian's entire vocabulary. He didn't rush. He didn't fidget. He just checked every clause, double-verified every license attribution, and signed off one last time on the infrastructure continuity binder like he was tucking away in a kid before deployment. The room buzzed with tension, but he moved like a man who had already made his peace with something the rest of us hadn't caught on to yet. Real quick, before we dive too far into this mess. If you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like the video and hit that subscribe button. 97% of people watch without subscribing, and it really helps the team keep bringing you stories like this. Trust me, you're gonna want to see how this one ends. Anyway, back to the circus. Julian kept strutting through the halls with that fake phone call voice, loud, authoritative, utterly useless. He had recently been handed the title VP of Strategy, which in practice meant nephew of the CEO who Googled synergy once. And now that the buyer, Northgate Holdings, a federal favorite conglomerate, was one day away from signing the biggest check Halcyon had ever seen, Julian acted like he was the one selling the company with his bare hands. I ran point on internal communications, so I was in most of the cross-departmental calls. And let me tell you, the moment Mr. Ellison, the buyer's CEO, entered the picture, it was like watching 2 species meet. Robert would greet him with a simple, "Good morning," and Ellison would respond like he'd just been briefed by someone from Langley. No fluff, no preamble, just clipped, mutual acknowledgement. Julian, on the other hand, kept trying to high-five him. Actual high fives. At one point, he called Ellison my guy. I wanted to sink through the floor. There was this one meeting, 2 days before the closing, when Robert presented his final systems map to Ellison's technical team. No slides, no jargon, just a laser pointer, a whiteboard, and the exact number of seconds each subsystem could handle load balancing during a failover. Ellison said nothing at first, just stared at the diagram like it was hieroglyphics from a temple he wasn't supposed to find. Then he nodded once and said, "That'll do." Julian had brought in a glossy deck with emojis the day before. No one even opened it. And yet, the mood across the floor was strangely celebratory. Junior analysts cracking sparkling water, HR handing out welcome to Northgate swag. It was like we were all waiting for a show that hadn't started yet, but kept pretending we'd already seen the ending. Julian even had the gall to start signing emails as Julian T., Architect of the Future. He had that printed on mugs. Real mugs. I'm staring at one right now in the break room with a lipstick ring around the rim. Robert, meanwhile, spent those days quietly cleaning house. He called no attention to himself, archived contracts, closed loops, sent follow-up emails no one asked for, but everyone needed. I caught him one evening deleting his own onboarding guides. "Why bother?" I asked, just making conversation. He looked at me, not unkindly, and said, "Sometimes you pack light when you know where you're headed." I didn't know what that meant at the time. I do now. The next morning, Ellison arrived 15 minutes early. He walked straight past Julian, nodded at Robert, and said, "Looking forward to your walkthrough." Julian blinked like a dog hearing algebra. Everyone else chalked it up to buyer preference. I didn't. Not after I saw the leather-bound folder Robert handed to the buyer's general counsel when no one was looking. It wasn't labeled. No logo. Just a tab in red. Clause 9.3. I didn't know the contents then, but I knew the air changed after that folder landed. Quietly. Sharply, like someone had twisted the pressure valve without warning. Julian may have been the architect of the future, but Robert? Robert was the man who'd built the damn foundation, and he'd just handed over the keys. Julian's condescension started like a leaky faucet, Annoying, then constant, then impossible to ignore. At first it was small, stupid crap, interrupting Robert in meetings to rephrase things in buzzword salad. What Rob means is we're realigning our back-end posture to future-facing scalability. No, Julian. What Robert meant was, the servers won't crash if you stop poking them like a drunk toddler. But Robert didn't flinch. He never did. He'd just lean back in his chair, arms folded, half smiling like he'd seen this movie before and already knew the ending sucked. Then came the more deliberate slights. We were in a joint strategy session with Northgate's integration team when Julian pulled up a new org chart he'd clearly made on the fly with crayon logic and a LinkedIn template. Robert's entire department was labeled Legacy Systems to be phased out Q3, Q4. No heads up, no context, just a cold bullet point under a pastel blue box. The air in the room went still for a second. Ellison didn't say a word. His lead systems architect glanced at Robert like, "You gonna take that?" But Robert just wrote something on a legal pad and nodded once. That's the thing about him. He doesn't react like a normal human being. No anger, no rebuttal, just this infuriating calm that makes you question your own pulse. Julian took that silence as permission, which was his first and last mistake. Around the office, Julian's ego kept expanding like an overfilled pool float. He brought in standing desks nobody asked for, changed the office playlist to Deep House, and started referring to himself in the third person. Julian's got a vision. Julian's streamlining inefficiencies. He also started booking meetings without inviting Robert, and then summarizing them afterward with phrases like, "You didn't really miss anything mission critical." Robert would listen quietly, then later forward an actual transcript of what was discussed, with corrections in the margins. And then there was the intern incident. Robert had spent 2 months working with a kid named Nate, sharp, hungry, asked the right questions. Nate was slated to shadow Robert through the transition. Julian, in one glorious act of performative sabotage, reassigned him to brand narrative with the comment, "We can't waste young minds on dusty systems." Nate cried in the parking lot. I saw it with my own eyes. Robert didn't say a word, just patted Nate on the shoulder and said, "Dust can settle. Brilliance doesn't." HR tried to stay Switzerland through it all, but even they started shifting in their ergonomic chairs. One afternoon, Marissa from HR caught Robert by the kitchenette and quietly murmured, "Just a heads up. There's talk Julian's pushing for early transitions, trying to reframe some exits as voluntary to speed up handoffs." Robert sipped his tea. "Well," he said, "can't be voluntary if I haven't volunteered." Marissa just gave him that look, the one you give someone who's about to walk into traffic, but they're oddly calm about it. I started keeping mental tabs. Each dig, each slight, each little humiliation Julian served up like hors d'oeuvres at his own ego banquet. It wasn't just strategy sessions anymore. He'd stop Robert in hallways to clarify expectations in front of analysts. He once handed him a printed-out TikTok titled, "Signs You Might Be Obsolete," as a joke. And when Robert just raised an eyebrow and walked away, Julian said to no one in particular, "Some people just don't get humor." That was rich, coming from the guy who thought fart sounds during Zoom calls were peak comedy. But here's the thing, no one but me seemed to notice. Robert wasn't retreating. He was circling, watching, listening, taking his time like a mechanic standing over an engine while some idiot keeps revving it too hard. There was this one moment. Julian was grandstanding in the hallway, talking about sunsetting old protocols and radical disruption. And Robert, passing by, just muttered, "Funny how disruption looks a lot like demolition when you don't know what you're tearing down." He didn't even break stride. That was the first time I saw the glimmer behind the calm. Not anger, not fear. Something sharper. Like he'd finally seen the play unfold the way he needed it to. And the bastard was smiling. Quietly. Like he was waiting for a clock to strike midnight, and he'd already wound it himself. The contrast was biblical. On one side of the building, Robert, tucked into a conference room with a whiteboard, 3 laptops, and the buyer's due diligence team, their questions coming faster than a Gatling gun. On the other side, Julian, DJing his own Vision 2.0 mixer in the break room, handing out biodegradable shot glasses filled with wheatgrass and preaching about disruption, like he was launching the next SpaceX. The junior staff clapped. Someone actually brought a smoke machine. Meanwhile, the real war was happening behind closed doors, and Robert didn't even raise his voice. The buyer's team didn't mess around. 3 of them, suits sharp enough to cut drywall, sat across from Robert like they were trying to catch him in a lie. Infrastructure continuity, rollback protocols, failover contingencies, license attribution, even goddamn fire code compliance. It came rapid fire, and Robert handled it like he was on autopilot. No notes, no hesitation, just precision. You could tell they were testing him, poking at weak spots, but every time they jabbed, he redirected. Firm, quiet, impossible to rattle. At one point, they pulled up a diagram Julian's transformation pod had submitted, an absolute Frankenstein of acronyms and arrows pointing nowhere. One of the analysts raised an eyebrow and said, "Is this production ready?" Robert blinked once and replied, "It's production ready if your goal is a lawsuit." Silence. Then, slowly, a smile crept across the legal analyst's face. She didn't laugh, but she slipped him a glance that wasn't just amused, it was conspiratorial. Like, we know. It was that look that made me realize something was moving beneath the surface. I sat in the back of that room, taking minutes like I always did, and I saw Robert nod ever so slightly when she slid a folder back into her briefcase with an extra tab poking out. Red, no label. I don't know what was in it, but I know Robert saw it, and I know she wanted him to. Later that afternoon, Julian sent out a company-wide email titled The Dawn of Halcyon 2.0. Attached was a calendar invite for a mandatory mixer in the break room, complete with Spotify playlist links and a note that read, "This is a celebration, not a debrief. Let's leave the spreadsheets behind." I nearly choked. Half the company went anyway, most out of fear, a few out of genuine confusion. Robert didn't go. Of course he didn't. He was back in his office reviewing an archive directory like it held state secrets, which at this point, it probably did. I peeked in during one of his quiet moments. He was printing something. Not from the cloud either. Straight from a local drive, air-gapped. I asked what it was. He didn't look up. "Old maps," he said. "Sometimes you need to remember where the roads used to go before the city decided they didn't exist." I didn't ask again. Meanwhile, Julian was live streaming himself in front of a balloon arch with a ring light, shouting out departments by nickname. "Shout out to the Code Cowboys, my Ops Ninjas, the HR Unicorns." I wish I were making that up. I saw him clink glasses with the new intern and say, "Legacy's dead, long live Velocity." That same intern used to spend his lunch breaks shadowing Robert. Now he was 3 LaCroix deep and chanting Julian's name with the rest of them. But behind all that noise, Robert was moving pieces. Quietly. Deliberately. I caught him in the server room that night, logged into something I didn't recognize. Not admin. Not root. Something deeper. He looked up at me and said, "You ever see someone walk into a poker game not knowing you're the one who printed the cards?" I nodded slowly. He smiled. "Good. Remember that." The next morning, someone from legal whispered to me in the hallway, "Did you see who added their signature to the transition MOU?" I hadn't, but I checked. And there it was, right above the buyer's general counsel. R. Callahan, not VP of Strategic Architecture, just his name. Alone. No title. It didn't make sense. Until I remembered the glance, the tab, the printed maps. Robert wasn't fighting the tide. He was laying the sandbags before the flood. While Julian toasted kombucha and danced like an off-brand Elon Musk, Robert had already mapped the whole endgame. And now? Now he was just waiting for everyone else to catch up. It started with a call from 14 years ago, back when Halcyon was still 3 floors of bad lighting and optimism, and Robert was sleeping under his desk more often than not. The CEO at the time, a gruff, pragmatic man named Will Fenner, had asked him to build a system stable enough for federal onboarding without getting the company sued out of existence. Robert did more than that. He built the bones, the kernel, a modular backbone no one else could replicate without licensing headaches so dense they'd need their own IT department just to interpret them. That's when the clause was born. It wasn't flashy. Tucked deep into an IP annex buried under stacks of onboarding docs and quarterly projections, it was labeled plainly. Clause 9.3, Founding Contribution IP Rights. Just a few paragraphs, legally reviewed, lightly notarized, but razor sharp. The language was surgical. In the event of acquisition, merger or sale involving operational dependencies linked to legacy architecture, authored or stewarded by Mr. R. Callahan, the aforementioned shall retain residual licensing authority, including, here's the kicker, mandatory consultation on any structural transition. That last part, that wasn't just a courtesy. It was a legal chokehold. But like most things Robert touched, he didn't wave it around. He filed it, backed it up in triplicate, and moved on with the work. The clause became a ghost, dormant, forgotten, practically myth, until 2 days ago. That morning, Robert walked into the FedEx storefront across from the Halcyon building wearing the same gray jacket he'd worn since 2014 and carrying a manila envelope. The clerk scanned it, affixed a tracking number, and asked if he needed insurance. "It's already covered," Robert said. The envelope was addressed not to Halcyon's legal department, not to the CEO, not even to Julian. No, this one went straight to the buyer's general counsel at Northgate Holdings. Overnight, certified, signed upon delivery. Inside was a cover letter, brief, emotionless, stating that per clause 9.3 he was officially invoking his rights. Accompanying it was a copy of the original clause, a breakdown of current legacy dependencies still running in production, 86% of Halcyon's infrastructure, give or take, and a time-stamped log of contributions. Every line, every commit, every system flag that hadn't been rewritten in the last decade. The effect? Quiet devastation. Like pulling a fire alarm no one else had heard in years, only to realize the wiring still worked. That same day, the buyer's counsel called Robert directly. The call lasted 6 minutes. No small talk, no formalities, just confirmation, clarification, and one request. Would you be willing to advise during the transition phase? Robert's reply, if needed. The counsel laughed once and said, "Oh, we'll need you." Back in the present, no one at Halcyon knew. Not Julian, not HR, not the board. Robert moved through the halls like a man cleaning up his apartment before the movers arrive, calm, collected, with just the faintest spark behind his eyes. He stopped correcting Julian in meetings, stopped forwarding transcripts, stopped responding to the snide comments. And that's when I knew something was off. Robert doesn't give up. He waits. He let Julian run his mouth. Let HR start whispering about streamlining. Let the transition comms team accidentally remove him from their email tree. He said nothing when his name vanished from the draft roadmap Julian proudly printed and displayed next to the espresso machine. Nothing when the IT access review marked his credentials as non-essential post-close. Nothing when someone swapped his desktop out for a laptop more suited to hybrid roles. But behind all of that, behind the indifference, was a man sitting on a legal landmine. I saw the paperwork on his desk once, half buried under his moleskin, a redacted copy of Halcyon's original IP escrow report with a sticky note that simply read, "Still relevant." It was underlined. And then there was the call I overheard. Not intentionally, I was walking past when I heard him say, "Yes, it's in place. No, they haven't seen it yet, but they will." Pause. "That's fine. I'll be in the room." Another pause. "Not as staff." I kept walking like I hadn't heard a thing, but my hands were shaking. Because that's when I realized Robert wasn't bracing for a fight. He'd already fired the first shot. He just hadn't told anyone yet. The conference room was too cold, too quiet, and too damn clean. That's how you know something's about to go sideways. We were all there. Halcyon's senior leadership lined up like mismatched chess pieces, and Northgate's acquisition team on the other side, smooth as glass, suits sharp, faces unreadable. The entire table smelled like lavender and nervous sweat. Julian had taken the center seat next to our CEO like he belonged there, elbows splayed wide, chin tilted with the smug confidence of someone who thinks charisma can compensate for competence. He was grinning like a kid about to present a third-grade science project, totally unaware that half the room had already read the answer key. He opened with a story about disrupting internal culture and quoted Sun Tzu wrong. Twice. Robert, meanwhile, sat at the far end of the table. No notepad, no slides, no damn coffee. Just that same quiet posture he'd worn all week, like a lighthouse surrounded by fog. The moment he walked in, the buyer's CFO, tall, silver-haired ex-military from the way he carried himself, gave him a single nod. Not a greeting, a signal. They knew, and Robert knew they knew. Julian started talking about streamlining legacy units, and someone from Northgate actually coughed to cover a laugh. It didn't work. Robert didn't even blink. He just waited. Let Julian flail his way through a 5-minute pitch deck filled with AI buzzwords and graphs that looked like they were pulled from a cereal box. When Julian finally paused for oxygen, the CFO cleared his throat and said, "Before we get too far into next-gen optimizations, I'd like a quick clarification. Can you walk us through infrastructure continuity as it relates to your core ops environment?" Julian's mouth opened, then closed, and like a damn ghost gliding through the wreckage, Robert spoke. "Of course," he said, calm as a priest at a funeral. Halcyon's core ops remain distributed across 3 secure nodes, legacy federated and built on pre-container protocols with maintained redundancy across DC and West Coast failover. No PowerPoint. No graphs. Just the truth, delivered in a single breath with all the weight of a man who'd written the playbook and knew exactly where the bodies were buried. The room shifted. Ellison, Northgate's CEO, leaned back, lips twitching like he was holding in a grin. Julian, not reading the room, tried to jump in with a joke. "Thanks, Rob. That's our in-house encyclopedia. He still documents everything like it's 1998. I keep telling him, AI's the future, but hey, boomer's gonna boom, right?" It was like someone dropped a fork in a funeral home. Even the HVAC paused. Robert didn't react. He didn't turn his head. He didn't even look at Julian. Instead, he opened a thin leather folio sitting in front of him, pulled out one card, matte black, clean serif font, no job title, and slid it across the table toward Ellison. Just one smooth push. Ellison picked it up, glanced at the front, then flipped it. A beat, then another. And then he laughed. Not a chuckle. Not polite corporate amusement. A full-bodied, barked-out laugh that cracked the tension in half like a lightning bolt through glass. He leaned back in his chair, held the card aloft, and turned to his general counsel. "You didn't tell me you were bringing fireworks," he said. The GC, composed, unsmiling, simply nodded and said, "It's in the packet. Last page." Julian was blinking so hard I thought he might short-circuit. "I'm sorry," he stammered, voice wobbling. "Is there something funny?" Ellison didn't answer. He passed the card down the table to his CFO, who read it, whistled low, and looked at Robert like he'd just realized the man had been holding a detonator the whole time. One of the buyer's tech leads opened a tablet, tapped through some files, and whispered something to the counsel. Counsel just nodded again. One movement. Surgical. Robert remained still. I could see it in his posture. The ease, the inevitability. He wasn't nervous. He wasn't surprised. He wasn't even smug. He was just ready. He knew this was the moment they'd been waiting for. The moment that card reached the right hands, the room didn't tilt. It pivoted. Quietly. Irrevocably. And Julian? Julian still hadn't realized the floor had been sawed out beneath him. Julian must have thought he was landing the final blow, the kind that echoes in boardrooms for years and gets you quoted in fast company. The deal was almost inked. The buyers were in the room. Everyone was half distracted by catered finger food and the scent of money. And Robert, sitting calm and steady, was the last thing on Julian's mind. Until Julian opened his mouth. He pushed away from the table just enough to look casual but dominant, like he'd seen on a TED Talk thumbnail. Wore that smirk that said he thought he was about to make corporate history. And then, with his voice loud enough to land in every Slack DM by sundown, he went full executioner. "Here," he said, gesturing wide like a game show host. "I'm the one in charge. Take 2 weeks off, Robert, and then you're done." The silence that followed wasn't dramatic. It was ugly. Real-world ugly. The kind of silence that makes people slowly look around the room to see if anyone else just saw the same car crash. The buyer's COO blinked hard and shifted in his seat. One of the compliance leads actually dropped her pen. Northgate's general counsel didn't move, but he narrowed his eyes like he was mentally preparing his next line of deposition. And Robert? He didn't speak, didn't flinch, didn't even blink. He reached into the inner pocket of his blazer, pulled out a single matte black business card, no embellishments, no title, no desperation, and slid it across the table toward Ellison with a steady, deliberate motion. It landed like a chess piece locking into check. Ellison picked it up, turned it over, paused, and then let out a laugh that shook the walls. Not just a laugh, a sharp, almost relieved burst of real, unfiltered amusement. The kind of laugh you hear when a plot twist finally lands and the villain realizes they've been playing the wrong game. "Oh my God," Ellison said, tapping the card on the table like a gavel. "You're serious." Julian straightened in his chair, visibly confused, then tried to recover. "It's just a standard courtesy. I mean, we're shifting operational oversight post-transition, and..." But Ellison cut him off. "Julian, you just tried to fire the architect of your own lifeboat." Julian blinked. What?" Ellison passed the card to his general counsel, who nodded once, opened a leather folder, and pulled out a marked packet of documents. He flipped to the back. Page 36, red tab, Clause 9.3. Clause 9.3, the GC read aloud, "Founding contribution IP rights. Grants residual licensing and advisory control to Mr. Callahan in any event involving the sale or merger of legacy infrastructure developed by or under his oversight." He looked up, which, by the way, is 86% of Halcyon's production backbone. Julian paled. "That can't be. He's not even a partner. That clause was never. It was never revoked," the GC cut in, "and it was reactivated via certified delivery 2 days ago, to us." All eyes turned to Robert, and there he sat, poised, calm, jacket folded perfectly, expression unreadable. Ellison leaned forward, almost amused now. "So, let me get this straight. You just tried to publicly offboard the only person who legally holds veto power over this entire acquisition?" Julian opened his mouth, closed it again, and looked to our CEO, who suddenly found something fascinating about his own shoelaces. Nobody said a word. Robert finally spoke. One sentence. "I've always believed timing is everything." And just like that, the room shifted. Not with shouting, not with chaos, with realization. Julian wasn't in charge. He never had been. The air didn't just shift, it fractured. Tension turned into something heavier, something clinical. Ellison didn't raise his voice, didn't slam the table. He simply turned to his general counsel, who leaned in with a whisper that lasted no more than 4 seconds. Whatever was said, it made Ellison's entire posture change. His shoulders pulled back. His smirk disappeared. And when he looked at Julian again, it wasn't with amusement. "We'll need to halt this session for a quick sidebar," he said, already standing. That one sentence detonated the room. The projector hummed to life again, casting a soft glow over the far wall. A Northgate associate connected his tablet and, without ceremony, pulled up a PDF, title in bold, Clause 9.3, Founding Contribution, IP Rights. The red highlight box around the relevant section might as well have been a bullseye. Julian shifted in his seat, visibly sweating now, fingers tapping a rhythm on the table like he was trying to Morse code his way out of a noose. The buyer's counsel stepped forward, addressing the room with the tone of someone who had long ago stopped tolerating amateurs. "For the record," she said calmly, Clause 9.3 was ratified and notarized in the original Halcyon IP protection file set, dated June 2011. It was reactivated 48 hours ago by Mr. Callahan via certified delivery, received and time-stamped by our office. The clause provides non-transferable advisory authority and residual licensing leverage, meaning that this acquisition, in its current form, cannot close without his sign-off. She didn't look at Robert when she said it. She looked at Julian. "You just tried to remove the one person whose signature this acquisition legally depends on." There was a beat of silence so thick I could hear the projector fan clicking. Julian opened his mouth. "There's no way that's enforceable." The GC interrupted without blinking. "It's enforceable, it's binding, it's live, and your failure to recognize it before this meeting may constitute negligent misrepresentation to the buyer." I actually heard someone inhale like they were about to faint. Julian glanced desperately around the table, looking for an ally. Our CEO looked frozen. The CTO picked up a pen and began furiously scribbling nothing onto a legal pad. Even HR had retreated into a kind of terrified stillness. No one was going to save him. Not today. Robert still hadn't spoken. He didn't need to. Ellison turned to him. Mr. Callahan, would you be willing to join us in a private breakout room for clarification on transition continuity? Robert gave the smallest nod I'd ever seen. Of course. They stood. Ellison, the GC, their lead architect, and Robert. Julian tried again, voice cracking this time. I mean, it's not like we were seriously terminating. Look, this was just a symbolic gesture, you know? Internal shift, team morale. Ellison paused at the door. A symbolic gesture in front of our legal team, in front of our general counsel. You fired the keystone of your entire architecture, son. Then, quieter. We don't buy companies without their bones, and you just tried to toss the spine. The door shut behind them. Julian slumped in his chair like someone had turned off the power behind his eyes. The rest of us sat in stunned silence, not sure whether to breathe or applaud. I glanced across the table. The projector was still glowing, still displaying Clause 9.3 in bold. At the bottom of the page, signature of authorizing engineer, required prior to execution. And beneath that, plain as daylight, R. Callahan, signed, dated, verified. He didn't just bring the clause, he brought the fuse, and now it was lit. When they came back into the room, you could feel the reordering of the universe before a single word was spoken. Ellison no longer looked like a visiting CEO. He looked like a man who'd just bought a house and found the former tenants trying to rip up the floorboards. The GC took her seat without so much as a glance toward Julian. Robert followed last, smooth and unhurried, like he hadn't just flipped the acquisition on its head with one piece of paper and a decade-old clause nobody bothered to read. Ellison didn't waste breath on small talk. In light of new information, he said, calm but clipped, we've adjusted the transition structure. Julian, you will no longer be overseeing post-merger integration. All technical and infrastructure continuity will report directly through a liaison of our choosing. He didn't say Robert's name yet. He didn't have to. Julian stared at the wood grain on the table like he expected it to offer him legal advice. The color had drained from his face so thoroughly he looked like a photocopy of himself. Ellison continued. Effective immediately, Mr. Callahan will serve as strategic infrastructure advisor for the duration of the transition. Any modifications to core systems, security schema, or architectural governance will pass through him. It landed like Judgment Day. Julian opened his mouth, but our CEO, bless his spineless heart, cleared his throat and cut in. I think that's a reasonable accommodation, given the nature of the clause. He said clause like it had personally attacked him. Then came the final humiliation. HR clearly pushed forward like a sacrificial intern, scooted her chair an inch closer to Robert and said, "We'd also like to clarify that this morning's comment about your status was premature. There was a miscommunication, and we'd love to revisit your role with the executive team after today's session." It was pitiful. Even Julian didn't look at her. Robert didn't even blink. "Too late," he said, voice flat and clean. I accepted another offer. Then, looking straight at Ellison, "Yours." That was the kill shot. Elegant, icy, absolute. Nobody spoke, nobody had to. Ellison nodded, the faintest flicker of a smile crossing his face. Not joy, not celebration, just respect, like a soldier recognizing another across enemy lines. Julian slumped back in his chair and muttered something about optics. No one responded. I glanced at the comms lead next to me. She was already deleting Julian's quote slides from the transition deck. We were watching a man be erased in real time, line by line, file by file. Robert remained poised the entire time. When the meeting ended, Ellison stood, shook hands with our CEO, and then turned directly to Robert. "Your systems impressed us," he said, "but your timing, that sealed the deal." Robert gave a polite nod. "It's always about timing." Ellison leaned in slightly. "That clause was hidden so deep it took our red team 12 hours to verify." Robert replied without flinching. Then they were 12 hours ahead of Julian. HR tried to follow him out, still babbling something about retention bonuses and updated contract terms. He didn't even look back. And just like that, the man Julian tried to publicly fire had become the one person Northgate refused to move forward without. Not with noise, not with vengeance, just precision. Cold, perfect precision. 3 weeks later, the office didn't feel like the same place, and in a way, it wasn't. The Halcyon logos were still on the walls, but the Northgate ones were already on the letterhead. The building had been scrubbed clean of the mess, the chaos, the ego, or more accurately, a specific ego. Julian's desk sat empty, his dual-monitor shrine to hustle culture powered off, his whiteboard of 10x thinking wiped bare. Word floated around that he was under internal review, though no one could tell you exactly what for. He wasn't on any calls. His badge still worked, but he hadn't been seen at the Monday leadership sync. One engineer claimed he overheard Julian taking LinkedIn headshots in the parking garage. Honestly, felt plausible. Meanwhile, Robert wasn't just still here. He was everywhere. His new title read Strategic Infrastructure Advisor. No department, no team under him. Just him. Perched directly between Halcyon and Northgate like a quiet firewall, protecting the integrity of what he'd built and now reconfiguring it with surgical authority. He wasn't managing systems anymore. He was architecting transition. The restructuring documents came out that Friday. I saw them when I logged into the shared portal. A clean 48-page PDF with all the new reporting lines, security protocols, and departmental realignments. Section 3.1 listed advisory positions, and there it was. Robert Callahan, Strategic Infrastructure Advisor, Direct Reporting, Northgate CIO Office. No bio, no fanfare. Just his name, weighty in its simplicity. And yet, it rippled. Across departments, his decisions were now gospel. His notes on system workflows were passed around like scripture. That same junior product analyst who used to giggle at Julian's TikToks now kept a notebook labeled Things Robert Says. I'm not kidding. I saw it. Page 1. If your code needs a press release, it's probably broken. But the best moment came in the kitchen on a Wednesday afternoon. I was making tea. Robert was sipping coffee. Black, no sugar, same battered mug he's always used. A young intern, fresh out of orientation, walked in and nervously approached him, wide-eyed, hero worship in full effect. Mr. Callahan? Robert glanced up. Yeah? The kid fidgeted. Sorry, how did you do it? I mean, everyone says you got fired and then somehow ended up running the place. Robert stared at him for a beat. Then he shrugged. It's easy, he said, calm as ever. I never needed the room to clap. I just needed the right clause to fire. He sipped his coffee, turned, and walked out. No speech, no smirk. Just a quiet man who knew where the levers were and waited patiently to pull the right one. The hallway door closed behind him, and I swear you could hear the shift. Not applause, not admiration, respect. The kind earned in silence and kept with precision.